Hello, everybody, and welcome to another coffee talk from Planet Fair. My name is Henrike, and I'm talking with
Margrét.
Hi, Margrét. It's so good.
I do have
Here
my
again
coffee.
on number 70-something, after years of coffee talks.
Yes.
Back to our favorite topic, living on Planet Fair, where everything is already done and beautiful and everybody's being paid fairly, looking into the world and thinking like, why do we see legislations popping up everywhere, but they never go far enough? They never reach the final goal. They end with 5%, 2.5% pay gap, far too much. So actually, why wait for legislations if they, in the end, don't make us reach the goal where we want to be, which means fair pay for everybody? And with fair, I don't mean a gap of 5%. So the question to you would be, what would we really have to do to go far enough?
Yeah, okay. All right, we're going to start there. Sure. I mean, in my mind, to get to Planet Fair, as you put it, we have to target zero. At the end of the day, right, our measures of the adjusted pay gaps, these are our best measures of the magnitude of the gap. So if it's 1% or 2%, that's our unbiased estimate of how big the gap is. So we should never settle for something less than targeting zero. Obviously, because we have talked about this before, right? And you've heard me say this before, is that every decision that we make, impacts the pay gap a little bit, right? It moves it up or down. So we have to give organizations a little bit of wiggle room, right? So it's not going to be, 0.0 every day. It moves up a little bit and then it moves down a little bit, right? So we want it kind of to oscillate around zero. But really, if you don't set your sights on zero, you will never get there, in my opinion. And it's interesting that you bring the 5%, which kind of echoes the Article 10 in the European directive. I was having a conversation with someone from Iceland, and Iceland has a very unique pay equity legislation, that everybody needs to get certified. And by design, there was no mention of how large the gap was allowed to be. And their motivation was that, if they said 1% or 2%, and God forbid 5%, that would almost be like, legalizing bias. So, should we legalize a 5% discrimination or should we legalize 2% discrimination, right? So that's my worry with the European directive. If we are going to normalize, 5% adjusted pay gaps within what is in the directive called category of workers, to think about an organization with maybe 10 or 20 categories of workers, and they have their adjusted pay gaps in these categories 4.8 and 4.9% across. It's basically saying that level of discrimination is okay, which in my mind is not. So I think we need to be more ambitious.
Yeah, exactly. I think the target zero and being ambitious is really important. And the issue that I see is that legislation, no matter on what topic, you can choose any other topic as well. Legislation is never sort of asking for that final step. I like you just said with Iceland, you don't want to legalize a size of a gap. And but in a way, all others do this in different heights and levels, and that's not what we want to see. So as a company, if you are going to sort of follow only the legal requirements and only comply to legislation, you're not going to be good enough, and you will not have gone far enough to attract the best talent like everybody is looking for, and all that. They will not go to companies that take the legal 5% as the norm. And I think it should be really worrying us if, as you said, setting it as a norm. This is, I really like the way that you put it. Yeah. More of this, please. So how do we get them to close it? How do we get those steps done? How do we get them to, how would you suggest we communicate so that companies realize, because we're talking so much about the content of legislations and what you need to do to comply. in brackets, then you are legalizing your higher gaps. Instead of telling companies, hey, come on, you do that because you have to, that's okay, but that's not what you really have to do in full. You have to do more. I mean, like we say with the certification, if you want to reach the highest level, you have to give the maximum effort, or you will just not get it. Because we can, because we are not legislation. But what is your thought on that?
Yeah. So I have some thoughts, but I'm going to twist your question a little bit. So,
okay.
So if we think about an organization and their pay equity, and we have obviously been talking about zero for a long time because if you want to get rid of bias in your pay decisions, in my mind, should be the core target. But let's maybe say, how should companies get started? Right. So really there are two things, or at least kind of two dimensions to this question. So one is the regulatory concern, right? So are you in a market with high regulatory concern or not? And then it's your internal commitment to pay equity, right? So is it high or is it low? So if you are an organization with, high commitment to pay equity, you should be setting yourself, ambitious pay equity goals, the zeros that we've been talking about, independent of what the regulation tells you. Importantly, if you are in a highly regulated market, you also need to think about minimizing your legal risk, right? And that does mean driving down your pay gap so that they become non-significant from a statistical standpoint. That's not the same as getting to zero. And the smaller the organization, the larger the gaps that can be non-significant. So that's why, your first question was, the way I answered your first question was kind of with those companies in mind, because we need to be more ambitious, because I don't think any CEO is going to stand on a stage and announce, I have a 7% equal pay gap, but don't worry, it's not statistically significant. Nobody wants to be that CEO, right? No. So, but minimally, you need to make sure that they are, so based on the regulation that, your gaps are not statistically significant. But then I would always say you have to go beyond that, right? And drive towards zero. So then the question is, okay, what if I'm not in a highly regulatory environment and I don't really have a lot of commitment to pay equity? I just need to get this done, right? And I don't want to get sued. I mean, a starting point then for those companies would be to fix obvious equity issues, right? So, take a look at your data and make sure that, there isn't large systematic biases or, individual employees are severely underpaid for no objective reason, right? So that would be the starting point, and maybe, subscribe to the coffee talk to build up the pay equity ambition. But I think there are always these two dimensions. And the way I would manage it is that we need to or each organization needs to set an internal threshold. I always call it the economic impact of the pay gap. So the size of the gap, really, that's the average impact on your employee from the group, right? So what is your tolerance on that? Is that 0.5%? Is it 1%, right? And then you drive your gaps and you manage them to be always below that threshold. Yep. So there are two thresholds: the statistical significance, but that's sometimes too loose. And then you want to set these internal thresholds that will limit the impact on the employees.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. Our time is over. Listeners need to subscribe now to the, that's okay. Our listeners need to now subscribe to our coffee talk. I like that call to action. And the in-depth, more advice will come in the following episodes. We will also attach some HBR articles to our coffee talks and some other great content. And we even like feedback and questions that are sent to us so that we can discuss those that we don't have to think about ourselves, but that are actually out there and want to be answered. So thank you again for such a great call, Margrét. I love it. I wish you a wonderful day and looking forward to our next session. Goodbye.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.